A vehicle identification number is 17 characters of cold, hard steel. It doesn't care about your feelings. It doesn't listen to excuses. And unlike the woman I shared a bed with for 10 years, it never lies. The garage door opener whirred with that familiar, tired groan it had been making since we bought the house in suburban Chicago. It was a sound that usually signaled safety, the end of a long week, and the comfort of home. But as the heavy door rattled upward, revealing the concrete slab inside, the air left my lungs as if I'd been punched in the gut. The space was empty. The spot where my 1967 Mustang Fastback usually sat, a car I had spent 5 years restoring, bolt by rusted bolt, was vacant. Just a few drops of oil on the gray floor marked where it had been. I blinked, assuming it was jet lag. I had been in Seattle for 6 days on a logistics contract, running on 4 hours of sleep and airport coffee. I backed my truck out and looked again. Still empty. Panic, cold and sharp, spiked in my chest. I threw the truck into park and stormed into the house through the mudroom. "Elena," I called out, my voice cracking. "Elena, call 911. My wife appeared at the top of the stairs. She was wearing her silk robe, her hair tied back in a messy bun. Her face wasn't confused or scared, though. It was pale, ashen. She looked like a ghost haunting her own hallway. "Jason," she whispered, gripping the banister until her knuckles turned white. "Don't call the police." I froze, my phone halfway to my ear. "What?" "The Mustang is gone. Someone broke in and took it while you were here. Are you okay?" "No one broke in," she said, her voice trembling. She walked down the stairs slowly, as if approaching a wild animal. I sold it." The silence that filled the foyer was heavier than the humid air outside. I stared at her, unable to process the syntax of her sentence. "You sold it? You can't sell it. It's in my name. And why would you?" She reached the bottom step and collapsed onto the floor, burying her face in her hands. The sobbing started immediately, loud, heaving breaths that usually made me rush to comfort her. But this time, my feet felt leaden. "I messed up, Jason," she cried through her fingers. "I messed up so bad. The crypto investment, the one I told you was doing well? It crashed. It went to zero. I leveraged the credit lines. They were going to put a lien on the house. I had 24 hours to come up with 40 grand. I stood there, my suitcase still in my hand. "You sold my car? The car I built with my dad before he died? You sold it for 40 grand? "I had to," she screamed, looking up at me, her eyes red and streaming. "It was the car or our home, Jason. I found a private collector who paid cash. He came with a trailer this morning. I signed the title. I forged your signature. I'm so sorry. I was just so scared you'd leave me if we lost the house." I dropped my suitcase. The thud echoed through the house. The anger was there, boiling beneath the surface, but it was suffocated by a profound sense of loss. That car wasn't just metal. It was the weekends I spent with my father while he underwent chemo. It was the smell of grease and old leather. It was the only thing I had left of him. "Who did you sell it to?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "A man, from Craigslist," she stammered. "He didn't give a name, just a dealer contact. He paid cash, Jason. The debt is paid. The house is safe." She crawled toward me, wrapping her arms around my legs. "Please, forgive me. I did it for us. I couldn't let us lose everything." I looked down at the top of her head. I should have felt relief that the house was secure. I should have felt compassion for her panic. But as I looked at her trembling shoulders, something didn't sit right. Elena was meticulous. She was an accountant. The idea of her making a high-risk crypto bet without telling me was out of character. But panic makes people do strange things. "Get up," I said softly, detaching her arms from my legs. "We need to talk about this, but right now. I can't look at you." I walked past her, into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. My hands were shaking. I looked out the window at the empty driveway. She had sold my past to save our future. That was the narrative. That was the story she was selling. I pulled my phone out and opened the banking app. I wanted to see the deposit or the transfer or the payoff of this mysterious debt. But then I stopped. If she paid it in cash, there would be no paper trail on our joint account. "Elena," I called out, my back still to her. "Yes," she answered from the hallway, her voice small. "Where is the bill of sale? I need to cancel the insurance. I'm not paying premiums on a car I don't own." There was a pause, a hesitation that lasted 2 seconds too long. "It's on your desk," she said. I left it there. I walked into my home office and saw the single sheet of paper sitting on the mahogany surface. A generic bill of sale template downloaded from the internet. Sold to Smithson Classic Holdings. Price $42,000. Date yesterday. I traced the signature at the bottom. It was my name, written in her handwriting. It looked nothing like my signature. I stared at the paper. My heart was broken, but my brain was waking up. I worked in logistics. I tracked shipping containers across oceans. I knew how paperwork moved. And looking at this generic, wrinkled piece of paper, my gut told me that VIN number 1Z87 hadn't just been sold, it had been sacrificed. But for what? "I'm going to bed," I said, walking past her without making eye contact. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, while Elena feigned sleep beside me. I could tell by her breathing she was awake too. She thought the crisis was over. She thought the tears and the confession had done the job. She didn't know that I had memorized the VIN of that Mustang. And she didn't realize that in the morning, the numbers were going to tell me a story she was desperately trying to hide. The morning sun hit the kitchen island with an aggressive brightness that felt insulting. I sat there, nursing a black coffee that was too hot, watching Elena move around the kitchen. She was making pancakes. It was a performance. She was humming softly, the spatula clinking against the pan, trying to broadcast a frequency of normalcy. It was as if the previous night's confession, the lost $40,000, the forged signature, the empty garage, was just a bad dream we had both agreed to forget. "Do you want blueberries or plain?" she asked, turning to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Her makeup was done perfectly, hiding the puffiness from last night's tears. "I'm not hungry," I said, standing up. "I have to handle the paperwork. I can't leave the Mustang insured if we don't own it." Elena froze for a fraction of a second. "Right, of course. Do you want me to do it? I can call them. You have enough on your plate with the Seattle contract." "No," I said, perhaps too sharply. I softened my tone. "I need to talk to Mike anyway. He's been insuring that car since it was a shell on jack stands. He'll want to know where it went." I took the bill of sale from the counter where I'd left it and walked into my study, closing the door behind me. The lock clicked, and for the first time that morning, I could breathe. I sat at my desk and spread the wrinkled paper out under the lamp. Smithson Classic Holdings. It sounded legitimate enough, fancy even. But looking at it in the harsh light of day, the document looked cheap. The font was Times New Roman, the default setting. The formatting was off-center. There was no logo, no watermark, no dealer license number listed in the header, just a P.O. box in a town called Aurora, about an hour west of here. I picked up the phone and dialed Mike. He was more than an agent. He was a guy I saw at every car show in the tri-state area. He picked up on the second ring. "Jason, I saw the photos of the suspension work you posted last week. She's looking beautiful. When are we taking her out?" "We aren't," I said, my voice flat. "She's gone, Mike. I need to cancel the policy." There was a silence on the other end. "Gone? What do you mean, gone? You wreck it?" "Sold it," I lied. The word tasted like ash. "Family emergency. Had to liquidate quickly." "Damn, Jason. I'm sorry to hear that. That car was your baby." I could hear him typing in the background. "All right, let me pull it up. Who's the lucky new owner? If they're local, maybe I can keep the policy active under their name. We verify the transfer, and you get a prorated refund."
Paperwork says Smithson Classic Holdings, I read, tracing the letters with my finger. The typing stopped.
"Smithson Classic Holdings?"
Mike repeated.
"Never heard of them. And if they buy vintage Mustangs in Illinois, I usually know them. Hold on, let me run the entity search. I need to make sure they're a registered dealer so the liability transfer is clean.
I waited, listening to the hum of my computer tower. Outside the window, a squirrel ran across the fence. My heart was hammering a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs.
Jason.
Mike's voice came back, sounding different. Professional. Guarded.
I'm looking at the state database for licensed automotive dealers. There is no Smithson Classic Holdings. There's a Smithson Auto Repair in Wisconsin and a Smithsonian Keep in Ohio, but nothing matching that name in Illinois. My grip on the phone tightened. Maybe they're private, just an LLC for a collector. Maybe, Mike said, but he sounded skeptical. But here's the thing. If you sold it to a private party, the title transfer takes a few days to hit the system, unless they went to the DMV immediately. Did you give them the title? Elena did. She said she signed it over. Okay, well, look, send me a scan of that bill of sale. I'll process the cancellation on your word, but Jason, be careful. If this Smithson guy drives that car through a school bus before the state recognizes the transfer, and it turns out he's not a legitimate entity, they might come after the last registered owner. That's you. I'll send it, I said. Thanks, Mike. I hung up and looked at the paper again. The deception was starting to peel at the corners. Elena said she sold it to a private collector who paid cash, but the bill of sale listed a company. Mike couldn't find the company. I turned to my computer and opened a browser. I typed in Smithson Classic Holdings. 0 results. I tried variations. Nothing. Then I typed in the address listed on the bill of sale. 405 West Main Street, Suite 204, Aurora, Illinois. Google Maps loaded the satellite view. I zoomed in. It wasn't a dealership. It wasn't a warehouse full of classic cars. It was a strip mall. And Suite 204 wasn't an office. It was a mailboxes, etc. type of store. A place where you rent a box to hide your real address. The financial disaster story was holding up less and less. If Elena needed money desperately to pay off a debt, why sell the car to a ghost? Legitimate buyers with $40,000 in cash don't usually hide behind P.O. boxes in strip malls. They want the title, they want the keys, and they want the car. But if the buyer wasn't real, then where was the money? I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I needed to see the money. Elena said she paid off the debt immediately. I stood up and walked to the door. I could hear her in the living room now, the TV on. I needed to play this cool. If I confronted her now, she'd cry, she'd spin another story, she'd gaslight me into thinking I was being paranoid. I needed hard data. I needed to know exactly where that car was. I went back to my desk and opened my bottom drawer. Buried under old tax returns was a folder labeled Mustang Restoration. Inside were receipts for every part I'd ever bought. The engine block, the transmission, the custom upholstery. And at the very top, the original title copy I kept for my records. I stared at the VIN. 1Z87A. 17 characters. Unique, immutable. Elena might have forged my signature on the title she gave away, but she forgot one thing. I had friends in the system. I had contacts who could track a VIN faster than the DMV could print a license plate. I pulled out my phone and took a clear picture of the VIN on the old title. Then I opened a messaging app and scrolled down to a contact I hadn't spoken to in 2 years. A guy named Harrow, who worked as a fraud investigator for a major auto lender. Hey man, long time. Need a favor. Can you run a full history on this VIN? Not just Carfax. I need the back-end title movement. Today. I hit send. The bill of sale on my desk seemed to mock me. Smithson Classic Holdings. It was a lie. I knew it was a lie. And if the sale was a lie, then the debt was a lie. And if the debt was a lie... I looked at the wedding photo on the corner of my desk. Elena and I, 10 years ago, smiling on a beach in Maui. We looked so innocent. My phone buzzed. Harrow. Harrow. On it. Give me an hour. I sat back, the leather chair creaking. The paper trail had started with a generic bill of sale, but it was leading me somewhere dark. I could feel it. The garage was empty, but the house was full of secrets. The hour I waited for Harrow to reply was the longest hour of my life. I stayed in my office, pretending to work on the Seattle logistics manifests, but my eyes couldn't focus on the shipping containers or the delivery schedules. Every time I heard Elena's footsteps in the hallway outside, my muscles tensed. She knocked once, asking if I wanted lunch. I told her I was in a conference call. Lying to her felt strangely easy, a defensive reflex that had kicked in the moment I saw that empty spot in the garage. My computer chimed. It wasn't the standard email notification. It was the secure ping from the encrypted messaging app I used with Harrow. Harrow, got it. It's weird, Jay. Check the attachment. You sitting down? My hand hovered over the mouse. The phrase, "you sitting down," is never followed by good news. It's the precursor to tragedy. I clicked the PDF attachment, and the document filled my screen. It was a raw data dump from the state's motor vehicle database, the kind of back-end access usually reserved for law enforcement and licensed investigators. I scrolled past the vehicle specifications. 1967 Ford Mustang, 289 V8, fastback. I knew all that. I knew the VIN by heart. 1Z87A. Those 17 characters were burned into my memory like a social security number. I scrolled down to the title history section, the rows of data that told the life story of the machine. There were the entries from 5 years ago when I bought it as a rusted Hulk. Then the registration renewals. And then, at the very bottom, the most recent activity. Date of transaction, yesterday, 2:15 p.m. Transaction type, title transfer, private party. Status, processed. My eyes scanned across to the sale price column. I was expecting to see $42,000, or maybe $40,000 if she had negotiated down. I was expecting to see the number that saved our house, the number that justified the betrayal. The number listed was $1. I blinked, leaning closer to the screen. I wiped my glasses, thinking it was a smudge. It wasn't. Under taxable value, the system listed the car's market value, but under transaction amount, it was clearly entered as a nominal fee. A gift. A wave of nausea rolled over me. You don't sell a fully restored, numbers-matching classic muscle car to a stranger for $1. You do that for family. You do that to avoid taxes. Or you do that when money isn't the object of the transaction. If Elena had sold the car to save us from financial ruin, where was the money? If she gave the car away for $1, then there was no $40,000 to pay off the crypto debt, which meant the debt itself might be a lie. Or worse, she had paid the debt some other way, and the car was a gift to someone else. I forced myself to keep reading. I needed the name. Who was the beneficiary of my 5 years of sweat and labor? New owner, JV Ventures LLC. Address, 1215 Oakwood Drive, Barrington, Illinois. It wasn't Smithson Classic Holdings. That name on the bill of sale in my hand was a complete fabrication, a decoy to throw me off the scent. The car hadn't gone to a dealer or a collector. It had gone to a limited liability company in an upscale suburb. I grabbed a notepad and wrote down the address. Barrington. That was money. That was old money, big estates, and long driveways. Why would an LLC in Barrington want my Mustang for $1? I typed JV Ventures LLC Illinois into the Secretary of State's business search portal. My fingers were flying now, fueled by a cold, clinical rage. I wasn't a husband anymore. I was an auditor of my own life, looking for the error that caused the collapse. The search results loaded instantly. Entity name, JV Ventures LLC. Status, active. Filing date, 2 years ago. Registered agent, Julian Vance. The name hit me like a physical slap. Julian Vance. I knew that name. It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't a random car collector. Julian Vance was a consultant Elena had worked with on a project last year. I remembered her talking about him over dinner. She had complained about his arrogance, his flashy suits, his demanding schedule. She had made him sound like a nuisance. "He's so annoying," she had said, rolling her eyes while pouring wine. "Always texting me after hours about spreadsheets." I sat back in my chair, the leather groaning under the shift of my weight. The pieces were slamming together with the violence of a car crash. The late-night texts, the work trips that went a day longer than expected, the sudden privacy with her phone. She hadn't sold the car to save our house. She had given my car, my most prized possession, to her lover. The betrayal was so absolute, so multi-layered that I couldn't even scream. She had looked me in the eye, cried tears of guilt, and told me a story about financial ruin to cover up a theft. She stole my car to give it to the man she was sleeping with. It was a trophy, a conquest. I looked back at the screen. The transaction time was 2:15 p.m. yesterday. I was on a plane then. She had driven my car to the DMV, forged my signature, and handed the keys to Julian Vance, all while I was at 30,000 feet thinking about coming home to her. My phone buzzed again. Harrow. You see the price, Jay? $1? That's tax fraud if they don't declare the real value. Also, if you didn't sign that title, it's straight up theft. Do you want me to flag it in the system? I stared at the blinking cursor. If I flagged it now, the police would get involved immediately. But I didn't just want the car back. I wanted the truth. I wanted to see it with my own eye. I needed to know how deep this rot went. Not yet. Don't flag it. I need to verify something first. Thanks, Harrow. You're a lifesaver. I closed the laptop. The room felt suffocatingly small. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the driveway where my truck was parked. Elena was still downstairs, probably watching a cooking show, thinking she had pulled off the heist of the century. She thought I was the dumb mechanic husband who would believe anything she said about money because she handled the finances. She forgot that VIN numbers don't lie. She forgot that paper trails are permanent. I needed to see this JV Ventures LLC. I needed to see Julian Vance. And most of all, I needed to see if my Mustang was sitting in his driveway. I walked out of the office and down the hall. Elena looked up from the couch as I entered the living room. She offered a tentative smile. "Is everything okay? You've been in there a long time." "Just work," I said, my voice eerily calm. "There's a crisis with a shipment in Barrington. I have to drive out there to inspect a warehouse. I'll be back late." Her smile widened, relieved that I wasn't talking about the car. "Okay, honey, drive safe. Do you want me to save you dinner?" "No," I said, grabbing my keys. "I don't think I'll be hungry." I walked out the door, the lie tasting bitter on my tongue. But it was a necessary lie. I wasn't going to inspect a warehouse. I was going to inspect the wreckage of my marriage. The drive to Barrington usually took 45 minutes from our suburb, a straight shot west on the interstate that cut through the flat, gray landscape of Illinois. I was doing 80 in a 65 zone, my knuckles white on the steering wheel of my pickup truck. The road hummed beneath me, a monotonous drone that failed to drown out the screaming in my head. Julian Vance. The name played on a loop in my mind, syncing with the rhythm of the tires hitting the expansion joints of the highway. I replayed every conversation Elena had ever had with me about him. It was a masterclass in misdirection. She hadn't hidden him. She had hidden him in plain sight. She had complained about his incompetence, his late-night emails, his demands on her time. "I have to take this call. It's Julian again," she would say, rolling her eyes with a theatrical sigh before stepping out onto the patio, closing the glass door behind her. I had felt sorry for her. I had poured her wine when she came back in, listening to her vent about how difficult the project was. I had been the supportive husband, comforting her while she was sleeping with the man she claimed to hate. It was a specific kind of cruelty, turning my empathy into a cover for her infidelity. I exited the highway, the scenery shifting from industrial parks to the manicured lawns and high hedges of Barrington. This was a town of equestrian trails and gated driveways, a place where people didn't need to steal 40-year-old cars to pay the bills. But the question of the money still gnawed at me. The financial disaster, the crypto crash, it was the cornerstone of her defense. She had claimed she sold the Mustang because we were 24 hours away from losing our house. If that was true, then maybe, just maybe, the affair and the sale were separate issues. Maybe she really was in trouble. I needed to know. I couldn't walk into this confrontation with only half the facts. I pulled the truck into the parking lot of a forest preserve, a quiet spot shielded by tall oaks. I killed the engine. The silence of the woods felt heavy. I pulled out my phone. Elena was the accountant, the one who managed the day-to-day bills, but I was the one who set up our network security. I knew her passwords. I knew the algorithm she used, a combination of her childhood street name and her graduation year. I opened the browser on my phone and navigated to the investment platform she used for her high-risk portfolio. I typed in her username. I entered the password I guessed she would use. Incorrect password. I tried the variation with a capital letter. Access granted. The dashboard loaded, the little spinning wheel mocking my anxiety. If she was telling the truth, I should see a balance of 0. I should see red arrows pointing down, a graph crashing into the basement. The screen refreshed. Total portfolio value, $58,450.22. Year-to-date return, plus 6.5%. I stared at the numbers. The green font burned into my retinas. There was no crash. There was no margin call. There was no catastrophic loss. The account was healthy. It was sitting there, untouched, growing steadily. The air in the truck cab suddenly felt thin. I rolled down the window, gasping for a breath of cold air. It was all a lie. Every single word. She hadn't sold the car to save the house. The house was never in danger. She had invented a crisis, a sophisticated, terrifying financial crisis, specifically to manipulate me into forgiving the loss of the car. She knew I would choose our home over my hobby. She knew I would swallow the pain of losing the Mustang if I thought it protected her security. She had weaponized my love for her to cover up a felony. She stole the car. She forged my signature, and she gave it to Julian Vance for $1. Why? The question shifted from how to why. Why give him the car? Was it a gift? A dowry? Or was it something darker? Maybe Julian had always admired it. Maybe they had laughed about it in bed, about how much time I spent in the garage working on that old thing instead of paying attention to her. Giving him my car was the ultimate act of disrespect, a transfer of power. It was taking the symbol of my masculinity and my history and handing it to the man who was replacing me. I looked at the map on my phone. 1215 Oakwood Drive. It was 3 miles away. I put the truck in gear. My hands were no longer shaking. The shock had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't confused anymore. I wasn't the worried husband rushing to a warehouse inspection. I was a man who had been defrauded by the person he trusted most in the world. I wasn't just going to get my car back. I was going to dismantle the lie, piece by piece. I drove slowly now, obeying the speed limit. I checked my rearview mirror, looking at my own eyes. They looked different, older, harder. As I turned onto Oakwood Drive, the houses grew larger, set back from the road behind iron gates and stone pillars. It was quiet here, peaceful. The kind of neighborhood where scandals were whispered over martinis, not shouted in driveways. I scanned the mailboxes. 1209, 1211, 1213, and there it was, 1215. It was a sprawling mid-century modern house with a wide circular driveway. And there, parked right in front of the 3-car garage, gleaming under the afternoon sun like a beacon of betrayal, was Highland green paint, my Mustang. It wasn't hidden in a garage. It wasn't under a tarp. It was parked right out front, displayed like a trophy. I didn't pull into the driveway. I drove past, my eyes locking onto the car for the 2 seconds it was visible. I saw the custom rims I had polished by hand. I saw the slight dent in the rear bumper that I had decided not to fix because it gave the car character. I drove 100 yards down the road and pulled onto the grass shoulder, hidden behind a thick line of hedges. I killed the engine again. I reached into the glove box and pulled out the digital camera I used for work inspections. It had a high-powered zoom lens. I wasn't going to knock on the door, not yet. I was going to watch. I was going to wait. Because where the car was, the thieves would eventually be. And I needed them together. I needed the frame that would hold up in court, and more importantly, the image that would haunt Elena for the rest of her life. I rolled down the window, rested the lens on the sill, and focused on the front door of Julian Vance's house. The ghost in the machine had led me right to them. Now, it was time to see them in the flesh. The waiting was the hardest part. It wasn't the boredom that got to you, it was the adrenaline simmering in your veins with nowhere to go. I sat in the cab of my truck, the engine off, the windows cracked just enough to let in the cool suburban air and the sounds of the neighborhood. A lawnmower droned in the distance. A dog barked. Normal sounds for a normal Tuesday afternoon. But what I was looking at through the viewfinder of my camera was anything but normal. My Mustang sat in Julian Vance's driveway like a hostage. The afternoon sun glinted off the chrome bumper. I focused the lens, tightening the shot until the license plate filled the frame. It was still my plate. They hadn't even bothered to take it off yet. That was the arrogance of criminals who didn't think they were criminals. They thought they were just two people in love, making hard choices. They didn't see this as Grand Theft Auto. They saw it as a romantic gesture. I checked the time. 4:45 p.m. Elena usually left work at 4:30. If she was coming here, and my gut screamed that she would be arriving any minute. I shifted in my seat, my leg cramping. I kept thinking about the performance she had given in the hallway this morning. The tears, the shaking hands, the story about the crypto crash. It was Oscar-worthy. She had looked me in the eye, the man she had vowed to cherish, and dismantled my reality to cover her tracks. She knew exactly which buttons to push. She knew I was a protector by nature. She knew I would sacrifice a car to save her from fear, and she had laughed about it. I was sure of it now. She and Julian probably laughed about how easy it was to fool the mechanic husband. A flash of movement caught my eye. A white Lexus SUV turned the corner at the end of the block. I knew that car. I paid the lease on that car. I watched as it slowed down, the turn signal blinking, a rhythmic orange pulse that matched the pounding in my ears. It turned into the driveway of 1215 Oakwood Drive. I held my breath and pressed the shutter button. Click, click, click. The shutter speed was high, freezing the motion. I captured the license plate of the Lexus. I captured the car pulling up right next to my Mustang. The contrast between the two vehicles was jarring. The modern, sterile, luxury SUV next to the raw, mechanical aggression of the classic muscle car. The driver's door opened. Elena stepped out. She wasn't wearing the distressed wife costume anymore. She looked vibrant. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen in months, and her hair was let down, cascading over her shoulders. She didn't look around nervously. She didn't check over her shoulder for her husband. She moved with the casual confidence of someone coming home. I zoomed in on her face. She was smiling. It wasn't a big smile, just a soft, contented look as she glanced at the front door of the house. Then, she did something that turned my blood to ice. She didn't knock. She didn't ring the doorbell. She reached into her purse and pulled out a key. Click, click, click. I held the shutter down, taking a burst of photos. The camera captured the glint of the brass key in the sunlight. It captured her inserting it into the lock, turning it, and pushing the door open. She had a key. This wasn't a fling. This wasn't a mistake that happened because we were distant. This was a second life. You don't give someone a key to your house unless they are a permanent fixture. She disappeared inside. The heavy wooden door closed behind her. I lowered the camera, my hands shaking uncontrollably now. The rage was different than before. Before, it was hot and explosive. Now, it was cold, absolute. It settled in my chest like a block of concrete. The narrative was complete. The financial disaster was a fabrication to explain the disappearance of the car. She stole the Mustang to give to Julian, perhaps as a birthday gift, perhaps as a token of her commitment to him. And now, she was inside his house, probably drinking wine, probably celebrating how well her plan had worked. I sat there for another 10 minutes, just staring at the house. I wondered what they were doing. I wondered if they were talking about me. Then the front door opened again. My instinct was to duck, but I stayed still, the tint of my windows protecting me. Julian Vance walked out. I recognized him immediately from the LinkedIn stalking I had done earlier. Tall, slicked-back hair, wearing a vest over a dress shirt. He looked like every corporate consultant cliché rolled into one. Elena followed him out. She had a glass of white wine in her hand. They walked over to the Mustang. I raised the camera again. This was it, the money shot. Julian ran his hand along the fender of the car, my car. He touched it with a possessiveness that made me want to vomit. He opened the driver's side door and leaned in, looking at the custom dashboard I had restored. I saw Elena lean against the doorframe, laughing at something he said. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers lingering. They looked like a couple admiring their new toy, a toy bought with my sweat and stolen with her lies. I took photo after photo, Julian in the driver's seat, Elena leaning in to kiss him, the two of them standing by the hood, the house in the background. I had enough. I had more than enough. I had proof of adultery, proof of possession of stolen property, and proof of conspiracy. I lowered the camera and checked the display screen. The images were crisp, sharp, undeniable. I put the camera back in the passenger seat and started my truck. I didn't rev the engine. I didn't peel out. I backed out of the grassy shoulder slowly, quietly. I wanted to drive through their front door. I wanted to smash my truck into the back of that Mustang and scream at them until my throat bled. But that's what the old Jason would have done. The emotional, reactive Jason. The new Jason, the one forged in the last 4 hours of revelation, was different. I was cold now. I was strategic. I wasn't going to make a scene on their lawn. That was messy. That gave them a chance to spin the story. No, I was going to use the law. I was going to use the system. I put the truck in drive and headed back toward the highway. I wasn't going home. I was going to the police station, and then I was going to a divorce lawyer. The VIN numbers didn't forgive, and neither would I. The lobby of the precinct smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. It was a smell that reminded me of waiting rooms and bad news. I sat on a hard plastic bench, clutching a manila folder containing the printed photos from the stakeout, the copy of the original title, and the screenshot of the VIN history. My hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped miles back, replaced by a clarity that felt almost surgical. "Number 42, the desk sergeant called out, not looking up from his monitor. I stood up and walked to the plexiglass window. "That's me." The sergeant, a heavy-set man with tired eyes, looked me over. "What can I do for you, sir?" "I want to report a theft," I said. "A vehicle theft." He sighed, reaching for a clipboard. "Okay, when did it happen? Where was it parked?" "It was taken from my garage in Naperville while I was out of town," I said. "But I know where it is. I just came from there. It's in a driveway in Barrington." The sergeant paused, his pen hovering over the paper. He looked up, his expression shifting from bored to skeptical. "You know where it is. Why didn't you just call us from there? Or take it back if you have the keys?" "Because the person who took it is my wife," I said. The sergeant dropped the pen. The clatter echoed in the quiet lobby. He rubbed his temples, a look of annoyance crossing his face. "Sir, if your wife took your car, that's not a theft. That's a civil matter. It's marital property. We don't get involved in domestic disputes unless there's violence. You need a divorce lawyer, not a police report." I had expected this. I knew the script. In the eyes of the law, a husband and wife were often viewed as a single financial entity. If I walked out now, Elena won. She would get to keep playing the victim, and Julian would get to keep driving my car while the divorce dragged on for 2 years. "It's not a civil matter," I said, my voice low and even. I slid the folder through the slot at the bottom of the window. "Look at the second document." The sergeant grudgingly opened the folder. He glanced at the photo of the Mustang, then flipped to the title copy. "The car is titled solely in my name," I explained. "Jason Miller, not Jason and Alina Miller. Just me. I bought the chassis before we were married. It's separate property." "That helps," the sergeant mumbled. "But she's still your wife. She probably has implied consent to use it." "She didn't use it," I cut in. "She sold it, or rather, she transferred the title. Look at the next page." He flipped to the printout of the DMV transaction history, showing the $1 sale price and the transfer to JV Ventures LLC. "She forged my signature," I said, leaning closer to the glass. "I was in Seattle on a business trip when this transfer happened. I have the flight records to prove it. She signed my name on a legal state document, transferred the title to a third party, an LLC owned by her boyfriend, for $1. That is forgery. That is fraud. And since the car is valued at over $40,000, that is grand theft auto." The sergeant stopped flipping pages. He looked at the documents, then back at me. The annoyance was gone, replaced by a sharp, professional focus. He picked up the phone on his desk. "Detective Saris? Yeah, you might want to come out front. I've got a guy here with a paper trail on a Title IV fraud. Looks like a forged signature on a classic car. Yeah, it's tight." 10 minutes later, I was sitting in a small interview room with Detective Saris. He was younger, sharper, wearing a cheap suit but carrying himself with authority. He laid the photos of Julian and Elena out on the metal table. "So, let me get this straight," Saris said, tapping the photo of the Mustang in the driveway. "Your wife claims she sold this to save your finances, but actually gifted it to this guy, Julian Vance." "Correct," I said. "And you are willing to swear on the record that you did not sign that title?" "I am." Saris leaned back, crossing his arms. "Mr. Miller, I need you to understand what happens if I open this file. Once we validate that the signature is forged, and we will, it's easy to prove since you were out of state. This isn't a leverage chip for your divorce. This becomes a criminal investigation by the state of Illinois. We will issue a warrant. We will arrest your wife. She will be charged with a felony. She could go to prison." He stared at me, searching for any sign of hesitation. "You can't ring this bell and then unring it next week because you guys made up and had a nice dinner. Once the state takes the case, it's out of your hands. Are you sure you want to do this?" I looked at the photo of Elena standing in Julian's driveway. She looked so happy, so free. She had looked me in the eye that morning and cried fake tears, begging for forgiveness for a crime she was still actively committing. She had calculated everything: the lie about the crypto, the fake bill of sale, the emotional manipulation. She thought I was weak. She thought I was a stepping stone. I thought about the 5 years of nights I spent in that garage. I thought about the grease under my fingernails. I thought about the trust I had given her for a decade. "I'm not going to unring it," I said. "She's your wife, Jason," Saris said softly, testing me one last time. "She ceased to be my wife the moment she signed my name to that paper and handed my keys to another man," I replied. "She's a thief. Treat her like one." Saris nodded slowly. He opened his notebook. "Okay, let's do it. I need a full statement. Start from when you opened the garage door." We spent the next hour documenting everything: the timeline, the value of the vehicle, the identity of Julian Vance, the photos I took. Saris was efficient. He typed up the report, and I signed it. My real signature, sharp and angry, contrasting with the loopy forgery Elena had used. "What happens now?" I asked as I stood up to leave. "Now, I put a bolo out on the vehicle," Saris said. "Be on the lookout. It's listed as stolen. If a patrol car sees it, they stop it. If the plates get scanned, they stop it." "And Julian Vance?" "He's in possession of stolen property. If he's driving it, he goes for a ride in the back of the cruiser. Your wife. Well, we'll probably pay her a visit at work or issue a warrant for her surrender. But the car comes first. We secured the asset." I walked out of the station into the twilight. The air was cooling down. I felt lighter, but it was a hollow kind of lightness. I had just dropped a nuclear bomb on my own life. The fallout was going to be messy. There would be lawyers, court dates, family members taking sides, and the public humiliation of a scandal. But as I got into my truck, I realized I didn't care about the scandal. I cared about the truth. I pulled my phone out. I had a text from Elena. Elena, dinner is ready. Are you coming home soon? Love you. I stared at the words, love you. They looked like gibberish. I didn't reply. I deleted the thread. I put the phone in the cup holder and started the engine. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the steel jaws to snap shut. The call came sooner than I expected. It was 7:14 p.m. I had barely made it back to the subdivision boundary near my own house, idly driving in circles, unable to go home and face the emptiness. My phone rang, displaying a restricted number. Mr. Miller? This is Officer Reynolds from the Barrington Police Department, a clipped voice said. We have a vehicle matching the description of the stolen Mustang detained on Route 14, just east of the Twisties. The driver is claiming ownership. We need you to come down and verify the VIN and ownership documents. I'm 10 minutes away, I said. I'm coming. I made a U-turn, the tires screeching slightly against the asphalt. My heart wasn't racing this time. It was beating with a slow, heavy thud, like a war drum. This was the moment of impact. When I crested the hill on Route 14, the scene looked like a crash site. 3 patrol cruisers were parked at sharp angles, their light bars cutting through the twilight with blinding flashes of blue and red. In the center of the chaos, bathed in the harsh glare of the spotlights, was my Highland green Mustang. I pulled my truck onto the shoulder, well behind the police line. I stepped out into the cool night air. The sound of static from the police radios and the idling engines filled the space. I walked toward the lead officer. Near the hood of the patrol car, 2 figures stood in handcuffs. Julian Vance was arguing loud enough to be heard over the traffic. He looked disheveled, his expensive vest crumpled. This is harassment. Do you know who I am? I bought this car legally. I have the bill of sale in the glove box. Elena was standing next to him. She wasn't yelling. She was trembling. She looked small, wrapped in her cardigan, her face pale under the strobe of the emergency lights. Officer Reynolds met me halfway. Mr. Miller? Yes, I said. Okay, stand back for a second. We ran the plates and they come back to you. The driver produced a bill of sale that looks questionable. He claims he bought it from a Smithson Classic Holdings for $1. That right there gave us probable cause to suspect fraud. It's not a sale, I said, my voice carrying in the night air. It's a theft. I walked past the officer, moving into the circle of light. Elena's head snapped up. When she saw me, her eyes went wide with a mix of relief and terror. She took a step forward, but was restrained by the officer holding her arm. Jason, she cried out, her voice shrill. Jason, thank God. Tell them this is a huge mistake. Tell them I sold the car to pay the debt. Explain it to them. I stopped 5 feet away from her. I looked at Julian, who was glaring at me with pure venom. Then I looked at Elena. There is no debt, Elena, I said quietly. The color drained from her face completely. What? I checked the portfolio, I continued, my voice steady. I checked the accounts. There was no crash. There was no margin call. You didn't sell the car to save the house. You stole it to give it to him. I pointed at Julian. That's a lie, Julian shouted. She sold it to me. I have the paperwork. You have a forged document, I said, turning to the officer. Check the VIN plate on the dash against the title I gave Detective Saris. The VIN doesn't forgive, officer. It tells the truth. Officer Reynolds shone his flashlight through the windshield of the Mustang, illuminating the metal tag riveted to the dashboard. He read the numbers into his radio, cross-referencing them with the report on his tablet. 1Z87, Reynolds recited. He paused, listening to the dispatcher. He looked up at Julian. Sir, the VIN confirms this vehicle is stolen property. The title transfer you are referencing has been flagged as fraudulent by the Secretary of State." "Jason, please!" Elena was sobbing now, the tears real this time, born of fear rather than manipulation. "I can explain. It's not what it looks like. Don't let them arrest me. I'm your wife." "You were my wife when you forged my signature," I said. "You were my wife when you gave him a key to his house. You were my wife when you drove my car to his driveway while I was working to support us." I looked at the Mustang. It looked beautiful, even in this ugly setting, but it felt tainted. "Mr. Vance," Reynolds said, stepping behind Julian, "you are under arrest for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit fraud." "And her?" I asked, looking at Elena. "She's the primary suspect for the forgery and the theft," Reynolds said. "She's coming in too." The officer began to read them their rights. "You have the right to remain silent." Elena's legs gave out. She slumped against the cruiser, wailing my name. "Jason, stop this! I love you! I'm sorry!" I watched them. I watched the woman I had shared a life with being guided into the back of a police car. I watched the man who had driven my car with such arrogance trying to duck his head to avoid the dashcam. It was a tragedy. It was a waste of 10 years. But as I stood there on the side of the highway, listening to the click of the handcuffs, I realized something important. I hadn't destroyed her. I hadn't framed her. I had simply turned on the lights. She had built this trap herself, brick by lie, forgery by betrayal. I just let the law work the way it was designed to. "Mr. Miller," Officer Reynolds said, walking back to me after the cruiser door slammed shut. "We need to impound the vehicle for evidence processing. It shouldn't take long, maybe a week. Then you can petition to get it back." "Take your time," I said, looking at the car one last time. "I'm in no rush." I walked back to my truck. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I sat in the driver's seat and watched the tow truck back up toward the Mustang. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from our home security system. Front door locked. I was going home to an empty house. But for the first time in 2 days, the house would be honest. The lies were in the back of a squad car, headed for the county lockup. I put the truck in gear and pulled away, leaving the flashing lights in my rearview mirror. 6 months later, the house was just a shell. The furniture was gone, sold or moved into storage. The walls, once covered with photos of vacations and family gatherings, were bare, showing only the faint, ghost-like outlines of where the frames had hung. The echo of my footsteps on the hardwood floors felt different now. It didn't sound like loneliness anymore. It sounded like clarity. The legal storm had been swift and brutal. Elena pleaded guilty to a reduced charge of fraud to avoid jail time, but the felony record was permanent. She lost her job at the accounting firm. No one hires a CPA with a fraud conviction. Julian Vance was slapped with heavy fines and probation, his reputation in the business community shredded. They turned on each other almost immediately during the depositions, a predictable end to a romance built on deceit. I didn't take pleasure in their ruin. I just felt a distant, numb sense of balance being restored. I walked through the empty mudroom and out into the garage. It was the last day I would stand here. The for sale sign in the front yard had a sold sticker across it. The closing was tomorrow. In the center of the garage sat the Mustang. The police had released it 3 months ago. It was exactly as it had been, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The Highland green paint was flawless. The engine still purred with that deep, throat-clearing rumble that used to make my heart skip a beat. But when I looked at it now, I didn't see the weekends I spent restoring it with my father. I didn't see the open roads or the car shows. I saw Julian Vance's hands on the steering wheel. I saw Elena forging my signature on the title. I saw the flashing lights of the police cruisers on Route 14. The car was a beautiful object, but it was a cursed vessel. It held the ghost of my marriage in its upholstery. I realized that you can scour rust from steel, but you can't scour a memory from a machine. A truck pulled into the driveway, a Ford F-250 towing an enclosed trailer. I hit the button for the garage door. As it rolled up, the afternoon sun flooded the space, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. A man stepped out of the truck. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a kind face and calloused hands. Beside him was a younger man, his son. "Mr. Miller?" the older man asked, extending a hand. "That's me. Call me Jason." "I'm Robert. This is my son David. We spoke on the phone." "Right," I said. "She's all ready for you." Robert walked around the Mustang slowly. He didn't touch it with the arrogant possessiveness Julian had shown. He touched it with reverence. He checked the panel gaps. He looked at the suspension. He nodded to his son. "She's a beauty, Jason," Robert said softly. "You did incredible work. Why are you selling her, if you don't mind me asking?" I leaned against the doorframe, looking at the car one last time. "It's time for a new project," I said. "This one belongs to the past." "I understand," Robert said. He didn't pry. Car guys knew that sometimes vehicles carry weight that has nothing to do with horsepower. We went to the kitchen counter, the only surface left in the house, to sign the paperwork. I watched as Robert signed the bill of sale. He wrote the check for $48,000, full market value, a legitimate transaction. No hidden LLCs, no dollar store scams, no secrets. I handed him the keys. The weight of them leaving my hand felt like a physical release, as if a heavy chain had been unhooked from my chest. "Take care of her," I said. "We will," David smiled. "She's going to a good home." I watched them load the car into the trailer. I watched them strap it down. And then I watched them drive away, the Mustang disappearing into the darkness of the trailer, gone from my life forever. I walked back into the empty garage. I looked at the oil stain on the floor, the same spot I had stared at 6 months ago when my world fell apart. I picked up my bag and walked out to my truck. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't look back at the empty garage. I put the truck in gear and drove toward the highway. As I merged onto the interstate, heading toward the city and a small apartment I had rented, I thought about the nature of truth. We spend our lives trying to build narratives, happy marriages, successful careers, secure futures. We tell ourselves stories to make the days easier. But beneath the paint, beneath the polish, there is always a chassis. There is always a hard, cold structure that supports everything. Elena tried to paint over the rust. She tried to sell a lie. But she forgot the most basic rule of mechanics. You can change the plates, you can repaint the body, and you can forge the papers, but you cannot change the steel. The VIN was stamped deep into the metal, 17 characters that refused to lie. It was a code that demanded accountability. I turned on the radio, letting the music fill the cab. The road ahead was long, and for the first time in a decade, I was driving it alone. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I felt a strange sense of peace. The rear-view mirror was empty, the road ahead was clear, and I finally knew exactly who I was.